Well, welcome back. Episode 6. It's nice to be back.
We back.
It's good to see you, Maddie.
You too. It's been a while.
Been a while.
Mm-hmm. How does it feel?
I've never sat in the middle.
Oh.
No.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. It feels weird. It feels like I'm actually in charge.
Wow.
You know?
That's
I've never actually been on the podcast with you.
I know. It's a new day.
LUMF.
With
Anthony, Ben, and Maddie. Episode 6. What are we talking about?
We are talking about Jesus in the temple.
The boy Jesus?
The boy Jesus.
The boy Jesus.
Not the man Jesus. Hadn't had his bar mitzvah yet.
The boy Jesus. With that in mind, Anthony,
yes,
grace us with the word.
Oh, come on. Let us read. We're going to be reading in Luke chapter 2, verses 41. It says this: Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival, according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in the favor with God and man.
Nice.
Thank you.
It's a good reading voice.
I know.
Did you practice?
Oh, yeah.
In the mirror?
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Because.
You can't see what you're saying.
But it just helps with the, what's the word, ambiance?
The ambiance.
Is that the good word for it?
Eden sometimes when she cries looking into the reflection of a mirror or a window just to see herself.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh. That's pretty funny.
She's a 6-year-old. Why are you laughing at her, bro?
Because I feel like that's something like I'll do too. So
okay. Before we get into a deep dive here into your emotional health and the scripture, I love that every once in a while, I know the Bible is filled with this, that you see 10 or 11 verses like this, and you can read it for what it's worth and leave with a very, I guess, simple understanding and miss completely some of the really strong contextual points that these 11 verses line out, or outline, should I say, and they give us, it's a stage in his life. It's quite powerful. Yeah. And so I'm excited because as we work through this, like just the culture, the tradition, what's taking place in these seemingly just nice narrative, 11 verses, have this is like a coming of age story for Jesus. Yeah. You could make a movie out of this. Yeah. What would you call it?
The coming of age story of Jesus. Or
that's a little long for a movie title.
We'll shorten it.
You lost all the Generation Z's and
the temple, the travel, and the time.
Do you want to start with the? We'll just leave that there. I regretted asking that question.
Okay, so first of all, verse 41, 42, we're really seeing Mary and Joseph's devotion to Jewish law. We're seeing that this family really follows Mosaic law, Mosaic covenant. Just with the fact that they're at the synagogue for this time period. Also, we have to focus on the significance of Jesus being 12 years old. This is a huge transition point. This is a point of character development for him in many ways.
Culturally, what does 12 mean?
So this
for
is
a Jewish
This is
boy.
the last year that he's considered a child, or the last year that he's considered a boy. So he is entering manhood in so many ways.
And will be treated as such.
Yes.
Mm.
That's also when he would take on like his roles, a role in the temple, like in the temple and in his religion, then considered a man as well. So it's almost, it's this transition for him from boyhood into manhood, and we see that transition continue into his ministry.
Wow. So this is where he formally takes on the yoke of the law.
Yes.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Mm.
Like all of a sudden, with just that first understanding of verse 1 and 2, like it sets up the scene, what is to come. So it was common practice for families with their extended families to journey to Jerusalem, to the temple at this time of children's lives, to participate in what is a coming of age, I guess, moment.
Yeah. Well, they're there for the Passover, right? So like huge event for them.
Nationally, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
And everyone from his towns come, I guess.
Yeah, and his entire extended family, they'd all be traveling together, which makes sense why they didn't realize he was missing for a day and a half. You think like, oh, you didn't notice your 12-year-old wasn't with you for 36 hours? But if you think like culturally and in this context, it makes sense. They all travel together.
It still makes sense to me now, because when I see especially younger parents have kids that are heading into that 2-3-year-old stage. I know Jesus was older, but and those kids are non-stop, and then they come to church. I know the mum does not know where their kid is. The dad never knows, but mum doesn't know for that hour and a half or 2 hours where that 3-year-old is. Why? Because you don't want to know. It's a bit of a break. Extended families helping, running amok, right?
Yeah.
If you don't believe me, look on any given Sunday. The 3-4-year-olds, there's a gang. And they run around this auditorium. They try to get on the stage, but I'm a good pastor. I yell at them.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Get off the stage.
Did they listen?
No.
Oh.
No, because my kids are usually leading it. And so. But, hey, if you ever in one of our campuses and you see that happen, step on in, hey? You happy with that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. Anyway, that all makes sense. Verse 43, 45. What's happening here? In that 3... We sort of covered that, hey?
Yeah. I think
my
one
bad.
thing that we didn't touch on is I think it's really easy to read over this passage and get stuck in this thought of like, oh, this looks like Jesus is actually being disobedient to his parents, and then just kind of get lost in that, because obviously we know that Jesus was perfect. He was sinless. So, and one of the commandments is honor thy father and mother. So it's like, okay, this doesn't make sense.
It doesn't align with his behavior.
Yeah. And so in these like earlier verses, just setting up the scene, I think that something we miss is what it speaks to about his character as a child, like the trust that his parents had in him, and the fact that he was clearly a very obedient child. Otherwise, again, they would have looked for him.
Immediately.
Yeah, they wouldn't have missed that for a day and a half. So we can see that this has nothing to do with disobedience.
No.
That's not the point of the passage.
When
at
I was
all.
a kid, I used to run off all the time. And, back in the 90s, you could do whatever you want in that sense. And I used to... Now they have nice backpacks with a cable. Do you ever see that?
Oh, yeah, all the
leashes.
time.
The leash on the back of
Surprisingly.
the backpack.
Yeah.
Before that, it was just like straight up handcuff on your wrist, connected to like a rope. And so I was just constantly handcuffed and led around the shopping mall because I'd just take off.
Yeah.
Right? I was a naughty kid. And then at home, I had so much energy. I same thing, just to the clothesline, run around.
Whoa.
I know. Can't do that anymore. Miss those days.
What's crazy about that is I like to think about what Mary and Joseph would have been thinking when they don't see him. Because if you know your kid is usually like obedient, he's usually there. Like, I wonder what thoughts they would have had. Like, where could he be at this moment?
I can tell you what thought they didn't have, because it took them 3 days to get there. Their first thought wasn't Jesus was in the temple.
Yeah.
Ever thought where they looked?
Yeah.
Where'd they go? For 3 days, where were they looking?
I wonder who they interrogated or like questioned amongst their families and friends.
Where'd you see him last? What was he doing? What gate was he at? What well was he at?
Yeah,
Mhm.
true.
Took 'em
Also, I
3
think
days.
their fear, like, obviously it's natural for a parent to, like, fear in those moments, not knowing where your child is.
100%.
But at the same time, if you think about the fact that Mary and Joseph knew that he was the son of God, right? Like,
Yeah.
they had that
It's a bit of
revelation,
a get out of jail
right?
free card.
So it's like, okay, did you think God was going to let his son get lost? But
Yeah.
also, like, obviously it's a natural response.
Yeah.
So, verse 46, we see it took them 3 days. They finally get to the temple courts. There's Jesus sitting amongst the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. What does that tell us?
For one, it shows, like, his respect for the
The law, eh?
yeah, for the law, for the practices in the temple. He's showing clear interest. It also talks about, like, how the people around him were in awe of the questions he's asking. So it shows the wisdom and knowledge he had even as a young boy.
Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and answers and his answers.
So,
Also,
sorry, first.
sorry, these are the same people that years later, when he's going into ministry, are going to start rejecting him, right? And rejecting his teaching. And so we see this for this brief period of time. These people are in awe of him and like really have this deep respect for the knowledge and wisdom that he shows.
Beyond
And-
his years, obviously.
Yeah, and so we see this, like, this love for him and this respect for him at this age, and yet we're going to see 20 years down the road that turns around and, you know. And so I wonder, like, reading through this, I'm like, at this point in time, he hasn't declared outright, I am the Son of God in a public space to other people. So it almost makes me wonder if it's like the rejection later on would come out of a place of jealousy and a rejection of him being the Son of God rather than, you know, because all of a sudden he's not just saying, like, oh, I'm just a teacher, right? People love to talk about Jesus as a teacher, but as soon as you declare that he's the Son of God, that's where this rejection comes in. So it's interesting to see how much respect for him they have here as a young boy. And
He's clearly learning from the rabbis. That's what Scripture's telling us. He's listening intently. He's asking questions. He's responding in thought, which then sort of leads us to that concept that if Jesus was only fully God and not also fully man, he would have no need to gain wisdom through earthly study. But we see here that he's clearly gaining wisdom from the rabbis, the teachers, and he's clearly interacting with them as a student would interact with them, though he was giving responses that amazed them, which doesn't mean he knew everything. It just meant that he was comprehending what they were saying with a greater sense of detail. So at some point, when I guess we get here to this idea that Jesus has, in this form, limited himself to a human's ability to gain knowledge.
Wow.
it also speaks to, like, we have to remember that Luke's main audience is the Gentiles, right? So what is he communicating to them through this as well is like he's showing them the respect that Jesus had for Jewish culture and for the temple and for the rabbis in that process. Because as a Gentile, years later, after Jesus has been crucified, it would be so easy to just be like, oh, reject the Jews, reject, right? But it's like, no, this is what Jesus' history is.
Correct.
This is where he's come from.
Participates.
Yeah.
Which is the fulfillment of all of these things.
And so I think that's also an important part of recognizing his family's respect for Mosaic law.
Jesus' response to their questions, hey?
Yeah. Why were you searching for me? He asked. Did you know I had to be in my Father's house? But they did not understand what he was saying to them.
I like that. Why were you searching for me? He asked. Didn't you know? Well, he's either saying, like, you could read this like, why would you look for me?
Yeah.
Versus, like, is he answering the question as like, it took you 3 days to get here? Did you look everywhere else? Why wouldn't you have picked me being here first?
Yeah.
All right. It's such a funny way of putting it. He's clearly beginning at a young age to acknowledge who he's I guess heavenly and true Father is. That's the statements that he's making.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, he's limited himself to humanness, and yet this gives us this small glimpse into, yet he is fully God, because he has this wisdom that he's the Son of God.
He's aware. He's
aware
self-aware
of what he is and who he is.
Yeah.
And yeah, even though he has limited himself in so many other ways, he still has that awareness.
Your father and I have been searching for you. That's what his mum says. I love his answer. Should have known I would be in the house of my father. That's like, for a 12-year-old, if we then cycle back to the first passage of context, he's coming of age, he's coming into manhood. He, in this very moment, is not just acknowledging that he is a child of God, but he's now acknowledging he understands he's the Son of God, and that he has that revelation before he steps into all the legal ramifications of being yoked to the law. Right? He acknowledges that, hey, he understands self-awareness. Son of God is about to be yoked to the law as a man, and the legal ramifications, we know, drastically change. Now when he bears witness, he doesn't need someone to back him up. His word carries the fullness of what we know back then children and women's testimonies weren't held at the same level as a man's legally, but he's now stepping into all those legal ramifications, and he chooses now to start to talk about, this is my Father's house. This is where I will be found.
I think what is profound is the fact this is the first time he speaks in the Gospel of Luke. And that's what he says. And just so, like, even look at Jesus, this is the first thing he says, but like Luke writing this gospel, like I can only imagine like the impact that would be to have Jesus, though his ministry is going to start or like carry on when he's older, like the first thing that he says, that character, like introduces his character, is I am the Son of God.
Well, and it makes, like, because if we look at the next verse then, but they did not understand what he was saying to them, it makes me wonder if, I mean, there's no way of us knowing this for sure, but like if they had never had that conversation as a family, like this is the first time he's recognizing to his parents vocally, like, my father is God, I am the Son of God, because we see Mary say your father, and then he contrasts it right away with I'm in my Father's house, almost like correcting her, not in like a rude way, but there's that immediate contrast of your father and I have been looking for you, and he's like, no, I'm in my Father's house, right? And so the fact that they are confused by that, even though we know by reading the nativity story that they're aware of who his true father is, and yet they're confused in this moment. So it's like, I wonder if this is not only the first time that Luke is quoting him in the gospel, but also the first time that he would be acknowledging this to his family.
I'm interested, like we said, we're all just having, it's not documented
in
detail,
we can't know.
But are we stumbling also upon the moment where Jesus, essentially adopted by Joseph, is declaring he's found his actual father? Right? And he's acknowledging, this is my, for lack of a better term, this is my actual biological father. Like, that's a pretty crazy moment. Like, imagine being Joseph or Mary in that moment. That response is not lost on you. Right? And I guess at some point, not dreading, but expecting that moment to come. Where your son is self-aware of the mission set before him, because that's essentially what he's saying. He's acknowledging that he has come on a mission, and Mary knows what that mission essentially is to the fullness. We don't know exactly what she's aware of, but she knows, and this is now just uttering like, as a mum, where would that leave you?
Well, right? This would require a response from Mary and Joseph of like letting go, right? And especially because of this timeline in his life as well. He's about to turn 13. He's about to enter manhood. And so he's really signifying, like, this is the moment, like, I'm taking on what my role is supposed to be on this earth. And he's making almost like a separation between this is my physical family, and I'm now taking on
Yeah.
this mission. This is my purpose here.
He's
So
12
like
years
that
old.
would be tough on them.
Like we obviously struggle to escape our current context of a 12-year-old,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
So Levi's 12, my son. If he ever came back with something so profound,
Yeah.
I don't know what I'd do. Like I'd be like, "You're 12, man." Like,
That's why I find that like the next verse kind of funny, because I think of what I know a 12-year-old right now, and I think of him saying that, and then you read verse 51 where it says, "Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them, but his mother treasured all these things in her heart." I kind of think of like he drops this like super deep line. He's like, "Okay, let's go," and then just goes home with them. That's what
he's still a 12-year-old in other areas.
yeah. But it's like moment of silence, says it, and then just switches
Yeah.
the scene. That's how I
They
just
grab
see
him.
it.
They head home, and he plays with his, family, his
Mhm.
extended family. Does
Who
other
also
things.
didn't
12 years.
help
Yeah.
find him.
Just throwing rocks at the kids you don't like. No, that would have
Yeah.
been Jesus, because that would have been bad. But you would have
Sure.
done it for
Fact-
sure.
Facts.
Yeah.
No.
Emma thinks you're really nice.
Me?
Yeah.
Do you think I'm really nice,
I think you've got a wild side, mate.
Maddie? Mm,
You're pretty nice.
thank you.
Verse 52 says, Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. I often think that line, I understand the in favor with man,
Yeah.
because as he exhibited all these, what would have been beautiful, Messiah-like characteristics, I just think it's also really interesting that Luke decides to let us know that he grew in favor with God,
Mm.
right? I think we all know that the love of the Father for the Son doesn't increase or decrease, but I think what we're looking at here is that it became evident to others that
Wow.
that he had godly favor that would have been exhibited on the lives of prophets and the saints of old,
Oh.
right? So the favor in man is that I think people enjoyed him,
Mm.
but also they could see that God was on his life, and they would have equated that to God's favor increasing.
Wow.
Right, and I think what we're really seeing is we're marching towards that baptism moment
Mm.
where it's actually not increasing; it's just being revealed each and every day into that, and we will get there where he's baptized and commissioned into, and the audible, right?
Mm.
But before the audible, they're seeing the telltale signs of a man favored by God
Yeah.
beginning
Yeah.
to increase each and every day. which
Well,
is pretty
and
awesome.
it could even be like an observance made by the source that Luke is using,
Yeah.
right? The part where Mary says she treasured all these things in her heart, that's actually quoted a couple times. It's a repeat of Luke 2:19.
Mm.
And so it's possible that
Yeah.
he repeats that because Mary was his eyewitness that he was using. Of course, we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, then looking at verse 52, it would make sense then reading that and saying, from her perspective, even though, like you said, God hadn't had a decreased
Yeah.
value of Jesus,
Yeah.
and yet this could have been Mary's observance, or whoever his eyewitness was, this could have been their observance over this period of his life.
I think, like, if we were to take a step back, and I know this is such an interesting moment in Jesus's life, but I think as we implement the wisdom of God in our life, as we take on the stature of God in our life, I believe what happens is that the favor of God becomes more evident upon us, almost like a radiance, and we then begin to encounter supernatural favor in the eyes of man as we carry his wisdom and we
Yeah.
carry his
That's good.
principles. And so we have a lot to learn from 12-year-old Jesus in simply submitting to the scripture, submitting to the teachings and understandings. And we see with the birth of the church that there's so much of this that is pulled out and celebrated to be able to sit under the apostles' teachings. Jesus first shows us how to do that as a 12-year-old. It's funny, as a 12-year-old he showed us how to do it, but some of us who are 35 or older still struggle
Yeah.
to submit to the teachings of God. But if we do, the Bible says we're going to grow in wisdom, we're going to grow in stature, we're going to have an increased understanding or people have an increased perspective of His favor in our life, and in turn we'll have favor with man. Sometimes we think all we have to do is pray and suffer. I think actually sometimes all we have to do is grow in His wisdom, take on His stature, be submissive to His teachings, and watch as His favor is revealed, and that then flows into man responding to the favor of God in our life. I think there's a lot in that for us.
That's so good.
So, quick recap before we end this episode. A lot to think about.
Yep.
It's a character development moment for Jesus. It's a coming of age story. It's a self-awareness moment. It is a moment where we see that Jesus is fully man, fully God, and the tension that happens. Or I wouldn't even say there's a tension there. That's probably a very wrong word to use. But just the balance there. And then we clearly know that He's not being disobedient, but He has a unique relationship with God, and this is the foreshadowing of His ministry and teaching. I also think that it's profoundly family based. It gives us a beautiful sense of the law of Moses and Jewish family customs. It's beautiful. This has to be one of my favorite stories in the Gospel of Luke. It's so wholesome, and it's not that the rest isn't, but if there was going to be a Hallmark movie made out of a story in the Gospel, I think it's this one. Outside of the Nativity. Which they would film down in Edgemont, wouldn't they?
Oh, or Abbotsford.
At least you didn't say Langley. All right. Well, till next time. Been a pleasure.
Yep.
Maddie, don't bully people.
Okay.
Anthony, go wild, mate.
LUMF.